Primitive wisdom. I am poor and naked, but I am the chief of the nation. We do not want riches, but we do want to train our children right. Riches would do us no good. We could not take them with us to the other world. We do not want riches. We want peace and love. Chief Red Cloud, Sioux. Homo sapiens sapiens, like all other animals, are subject to the continual process of adapting to the limitations of their environment. In the traditional evolution model, humans reached their full potential around 50,000 years ago. That is, their full behavioral modernity. A new trait emerged when humans ascended to become a creature that could manipulate the environment and become master of the animal kingdom. Ethnologists have often observed that the organized slaughter of members of their own species is virtually unknown among other animal species. Humans' special propensity to kill its own kind, shared to a limited degree with rats and chimpanzees and some other mammals, may be attributed to our ability to adapt in nearly any environment. War started among humans as a territorial instinct within our natural environment. The trait of organized warfare is characteristic of humans alone. Almost every paleoanthropologist would agree that modern humans evolved in Africa around 200,000 years ago, yet the fossil evidence for the earliest missing link is currently non-existent. This may be because of the difficulty of recognizing what differences a true modern human is in the fossil record, or that such a linking entity ever existed. There are currently many contenders thought to be the earliest offshoots of our species, those who possess a mix of both modern and primitive traits. For some, this means our species once had a greater range of physical variation than today. For other researchers, this means more than one species of Homo sapien may have lived in Africa during this time. Homo sapien is Latin for knowing man or wise man, is the only living species in the Homo genus. Neither Neanderthal nor any other proto-human ever created rock art, cave paintings, or symbolic artifacts like their wise contemporaries. Because our ancestors were the first to create ritualistic art and religious icons, anthropologists are inclined to call our species Homo spiritualists, as we were the first to become aware of ourselves. The word shaman comes from the language of the Tungus reindeer herders of the Lake Baikal region in Siberian Russia. Although the roots of shamanism date back 50,000 years to the Pleistocene epoch, the term can be applied to all indigenous healing practices worldwide. The Tungus people of Siberia believe a shaman is a person of either sex who can master the spirits in this material world. Tungus shamans claim to introduce spirits into their own bodies or to use their power over other spirits, especially in the interests of helping members of their clan. There are 5 recognized factors that can enhance a person's shamanic or psychic ability. A potential shaman could have been born genetically predisposed or suffered a traumatic childhood event, experienced a near-death state, sustained a head injury, or experienced some other kind of initiatory illness. These factors still apply in this modern age, And any one of these abilities can shatter a person's programming and distort the illusion of modern life. The shamanistic tendency can be described as looking into the common reality humans share and opening themselves to the other ways of being proactive in the world. The common human outlook, identified as the fourth world, is resigned to the inevitability of exploitation, parasitic existence, and a dog eat dog mentality. Shamans make their connection to the fifth world, a density filled with spirits existing in other dimensions. Out of Africa. Ultimately, we are all Africans. Studies of mitochondrial DNA suggest that all human beings are descended from a small population, only a few hundred individuals, that emerged out of Africa at least 60,000 years ago, soon thereafter to populate regions of the Middle East, Europe, and Asia. In the ancient astronaut construct, the idea that beings from other planets or galaxies visited and bred with or genetically changed all Earth dwellers in ancient times, that all humans emerged from Africa in a similar time frame with the potential genetic blending of the Atlantis survivors. Scientists do not understand why this new type of Homo sapiens suddenly emerged or how the change happened, but we can trace our genes back to a single female 150,000 to 250,000 years ago, known as mitochondrial Eve. She would have been roughly contemporary with modern humans, whose fossils have been found in Ethiopia near the Omo River and at Hertho. Mitochondrial Eve lived significantly earlier than the out of Africa migration, which occurred some 60,000 to 95,000 years ago. Ancient Sumerian cuneiform tablets and cylinder seals uncovered in modern Iraq, the former kingdom of ancient Babylon, tell the story of ET star gods called the Anunnaki coming to Earth and genetically manipulating humankind, as discussed in Chapter 3, Blood of the Gods. Only primitive humanoids lived on Earth before the Anunnaki, or if there were even modern humans, they were the offspring of Atlantis survivors. The creation of modern humans seemed to be described as a type of cloning and what we would today consider in vitro fertilization. The result was a hybrid human with enhanced intellect who could perform the physical worker duties for the gods. Homo sapiens were created and bred as a slave race for the Anunnaki to extract gold from Africa. According to this theory, every single human being on Earth came from some other planetary system. According to the ancient astronaut theory, not one single person on Earth is a native inhabitant, but we are derived from 22 root races of DNA introduced primarily by the Anunnaki. Therefore, not a single human being has evolved here on Earth. Those from heavens came is literally who the Anunnaki considered themselves to be. And while the Anunnaki returned to where they came from, the humans multiplied and migrated out of Africa to all corners of the earth. The earliest religious written texts, as well as the first documented monotheistic religions, also developed in Africa. During the European Dark Ages, many ancient manuscripts were preserved in African libraries in places such as Alexandria, Ethiopia, and Timbuktu. The civilization of ancient Egypt lasted longer than the entire span of what we have come to accept as recorded history, a period of many thousands of years. During these millennia, the Egyptians conceived a multitude of gods and goddesses, as well as esoteric practices whose meaning and purpose are still being unraveled by researchers. In addition, Egypt was the source of the first true monotheistic religion, developed under the pharaoh Akhenaten. This rich tradition was mostly unknown until the early 19th century, when the Egyptian language was finally deciphered from inscriptions on the Rosetta Stone. Advent of creative thinking. Conventional theories more or less assert that in the course of evolution, humans came down from the trees and began to walk upright, which freed our hands to create. And what we created were tools, which we continued to refine. Thus, according to scientists and researchers, what came to differentiate humans from other forms of animals was gaining the ability to walk upright on two legs, and then to invent and use tools. However, it is now widely recognized that other animals, such as the crow, also walk on two legs and use tools to accomplish tasks. What actually separates humans from other animals is our ability to express ourselves through symbolism and creativity. About 40,000 years ago, humans began to use what is called lateral thinking. It marked a blossoming period of creativity, with spiritual and religious ideas being introduced virtually overnight. At the same time, the incredible paintings of Upper Paleolithic Europe, the cave art of North Africa, and the advent of rock art within tribal and indigenous cultures began to appear all around the world, and all dating roughly from the same period. If the human brain is considered a receiver and decoder of data transmitted through our senses, it is possible that our minds receive highly sensitive information from our brains. This could then be processed by our brain transmitter function to perceive realities that are separate from our normal experience. If during our regular waking experience we're tuned into channel normal, can we then alter our state of consciousness by somehow retuning the receiver and in this way change the channel? This is precisely what might be happening as evolution finely tuned our consciousness to allow us a way to access other levels of reality. This can be thought of as a secret doorway inside one's own mind to an awareness of phenomenon beyond the physical world of the senses. Most of the time, this doorway is closed to the average person, and we cannot go through it in the normal, alert, problem-solving state of consciousness, useful and necessary for survival in the physical world. This doorway, however, can access other freestanding realities, multiple dimensions that are real and do exist, but are outside the capacity of any external instrument that we have created with our science to access. The key to the secret doorway is in the deep subconscious regions of the psyche, and usually accessed with meditation, through which one can move into altered states of consciousness. According to author Graham Hancock in his book Supernatural: Meetings with the Ancient Teachers of Mankind, quote, "Our brains may be hardwired to focus on daily material reality, but in an altered state of consciousness, we retune the receiver wavelength of the brain, and we gain genuine access to other realities, to other dimensions, if you like, which are normally closed to us and normally outside the range of our senses. And our brain is an instrument that can receive those impressions only in an altered state of consciousness." This then introduces the big question: is our brain the source of consciousness or the vehicle of consciousness? If it is the vehicle for conscious thought and perception, then of course consciousness can survive death, as shamans have long contended. because the death of the brain is simply the death of the vehicle carrying our conscious existence, and not the death of consciousness itself. This suggests that consciousness is just one of many signals our brain receives and interprets. Hardwired to belong. What triggers people to kill one another? Unfortunately, human history is splattered with blood. In the dozen or so wars in the 20th century alone, 160 million people have died. Although armed conflict still dominates the headlines today, fewer people actually are fighting and dying in wars. Apparently, there were fewer combat deaths in the last decade than at any other time in the last 100 years. Is this a move in the right direction towards less lethal wars, or just a result of better field hospitals? More importantly, is war an inevitable and unavoidable aspect of the human experience? Is it a natural state of human affairs, or an aberration of modern humans that goes against our hardwired longing to belong? If we look far back to prehistory, to the Neolithic or even the Paleolithic eras, we will find very little, if any, evidence of war. The living sites of Stone Age people are remarkably free of mass graves, fortified sites, and depictions of war in cave art. Also missing are images of shields, which consistently arise as defensive weapons when people are attacked with spears. No one can determine unequivocally that there was no warfare 20 or 50,000 years ago, only that there is little or no evidence of any. So can we abolish war, just as we fought to abolish slavery or eradicate deadly diseases? Or will we continue fighting each other to settle our differences with ever more sophisticated weapons and techniques? Maybe if we can remember our sense of belonging to a single human race, recall our primitive wisdom, and hearken back to when our differences could be overcome with superior skills of reasoning, the concept of warfare, like smallpox, will become extinct. Recently, scientists discovered mirror neurons in all primates. Mirror neurons enable us to experience another's plight as if we were experiencing it ourselves, similar to empathy. Several studies suggest that humans are not wired for aggression, violence, and self-interest. Explained as a byproduct of our hierarchical oppression, instead, we are hardwired for collaboration and companionship. As studies show, our main objective is to belong. And as consciousness changes throughout history, we evolve and we extend our empathetic ties. Today's technology allows people around the globe to interact, even furthering our potential for empathetic connection. This raises the fundamental question: if there is such a thing as collective consciousness among the human race, isn't it possible for us as sentient beings to perceive how other humans are feeling and collectively act from that more feeling place? Some would call this compassion. In a way, the last uncontacted tribes in the Amazon basin or the deep valleys of New Guinea are part of our modern consciousness, as we are part of their primitive one. And our behavior demonstrates that as a collective civilization, we are no more advanced than the lowest common denominator. Perhaps this perceived life is an aspect of what the Australian Aboriginals referred to as dream time, or the Indians called the illusion Maya. Seemingly, even the most advanced space-traveling human is connected to the last Stone Age tribesmen, and all are part of the dream. Given the weight of evidence in favor of our similarities, rather than differences, we really are all one being and are able to tap into the mental capacities of others in our species group, similar to what has been observed within animal groups. Caves of sacred art. The valleys of the Dordogne and Verzy rivers comprise a picturesque region in south-central France that is sprinkled with deep caves and subterranean streams. When human skeletons were unearthed from inside some of the caves in 1868, what soon followed was a windfall of archaeological evidence from the Paleolithic era. Most remarkable were the paintings that adored the caves, not only because of their age, but also because of their exquisite coloring and the skill with which they were drawn. A myriad of Stone Age tools, weapons, arrowheads, and bone carvings have also been discovered in the French caves. The earliest artistic renderings in Europe can be found on the walls and ceilings of French and Spanish caverns. They represent a concern for hunting, fertility, and regeneration. Although most cave art is found in the Vézère and Dordogne River valleys of France, along with the Pyrenees and Cantabrian mountain regions of Spain, cave paintings and engravings appear throughout Europe. Apart from animal representations, wall art in Europe also includes abstract images such as lines, dots, and a combination of these elements. Human figures are rarely depicted, with the exception of the carved Venus figurines that are found in many prehistoric caves. There are hand stencils in some caves, formed by painting around a spread out hand, and these are thought to represent male and female symbols used in fertility and initiation rites. Footmarks and fingerprints of young children have been found at certain sites, suggesting rituals for younger members learning about their adult roles. Some images appear to represent people wearing masks, animal skins, or antlers. These animal disguises may be camouflage for hunting or ceremonial dress worn by shaman during hunting rituals. The most famous of all the Dordogne Valley caves is called Lascaux. Paintings found there are dated to the last ice age in Europe, 17,000 years ago, and are considered to be the finest prehistoric works in existence. Included in the famous Lascaux cave are 5 or 6 identifiable styles of rendering, including abundant images of bison, mammoth, and horses, plus the largest known prehistoric painting in existence, a 5.5 meter long bull rendering with an astonishingly expressive face and head. Due to mold and deterioration from body heat and the warm breath of frequent visitors, the original Lascaux cave was completely closed to the public in 1963. High in a topographical area of the Dordogne Valley, in another amazing cavern called Rofagnac Cave, is a 3-level maze of corridors and galleries. Only the upper level, the largest of the 3, shows evidence that it was explored and frequented by prehistoric artists. Rofagnac Cave is best known for its prolific representations of large mammals, particularly woolly mammoths, bison, horses, and woolly rhinoceros. The Rofagnac Cave was decorated in the late Magdalenian period of the Paleolithic era, around 13,000 BCE, a relative latecomer. Most of the Paleolithic caves with paintings and decorated rock shelters in France date back 23,000 years or more. The oldest are 32,000 years old and are located in Chevet Pont d'Arc Cave, only rediscovered in 1994. These oldest renderings were created by people in the Orogenixian culture, who lived 28,000 to 40,000 years ago in this part of France, confirming the radiocarbon dating of both the human and animal occupants. Recent studies establish that the Chavette cave paintings are the oldest and the most elaborate ever discovered in France, challenging our current knowledge of human cognitive evolution. According to new dating tests, a series of seals painted more than 42,000 years ago in the cave of Nirja in Malaga, Spain, are regarded as the first paintings ever created by humans. Until recently, archaeologists thought that the oldest art was made by humans during the Orogenixian period, an upper Paleolithic culture located in Europe and Southwest Asia, and according to radiocarbon dating, lasted approximately 47,000 to 41,000 years ago. But the Nirja paintings are much older and far more primitive than the 32,000-year-old paintings found in Chavette Point d'Arc Cave, for example, as featured in the film Cave of Forgotten Dreams. Aboriginal song lines of Australia. Eons ago, the Aboriginal people of Australia, the oldest unchanged variety of Homo sapiens sapien and the oldest surviving intact culture, visualized the planet sphere. In their collective consciousness, known as dream time, the Aboriginal people have the capacity to communicate telepathically. Creating a rhythm with two sticks and a hollow branch known as a didgeridoo, the oldest musical instrument in the world, tribes come together in a unity dance ritual. Using these primal instruments, the Aboriginal people can dance themselves into a deep trance-like state and evoke the energy of Australian sacred sites. The Aboriginal people recognize the Earth's ley lines, name them song lines in accordance with their musical instruments, and invoked visualizations of the landscape not seen under normal conditions. The Australian Aborigines make strong use of their ancient dream time, a lore that even alerts them to future events. It is a lore handed down by Wangdijania, a sort of female deity. In the Australian outback, generations of Aboriginal people have gathered continuously at Ayers Rock or Uluru for 30,000 years. They instinctively followed the song lines, or ley lines as they're called in Europe, and traveled great distances to reach their destination. At certain points on the planet's surface, ether flows stronger than at other places. The ether flows in a set grid across the surface of the planet, much like a lattice of energy lines. There are some places where the etheric energy makes contact with the landscape. Here, the Aboriginal people assembled for ritual events and also created a vast array of paintings. Interestingly, they seemingly did not see themselves as painters, but rather allowed the hand of the spirit to guide their brushstrokes. For thousands of years, native people followed ancient paths to these energy spots, and they became their sacred places. Primitive shrines were first constructed as physical manifestations on locations of etheric intersections. At these sacred places in Europe, ancient megalithic stones were erected, literally inserted into the Earth's surface. These huge stones stimulate the flow of etheric energy, much like an acupuncturist who inserts needles into the skin of a patient stimulates the life force energy in a human body. There were also several stone circles in Australia, some of which were destroyed by modern nuclear testing. Australian Aboriginals, much like the Stonehenge Druids of ancient Britain, knew where etheric energy lines of the planet were located, and these locations are where the first evidence of organized worship were performed. The Australian Aboriginals are closely related to the primitive tribal groups living on the neighboring island of New Guinea. There are some 800 living languages in New Guinea alone, some as different as the English language is to Chinese. Jagged mountains isolate population groups, and some tribes continue to wage war against each other. A few tribes remain uncontacted by the modern world, living their lives in Stone Age obscurity and unaware of others living in skyscrapers and venturing into space. The cargo cult began near here, where primitive people started worshiping falling World War II cargo boxes that they thought were delivered by the gods. How could they know differently? These tribes still retain a strong belief in the spirit world. New Guinea hunters will not roam into certain areas for fear of provoking bad spirits, for example. The cargo cult. With the onset of World War II in the South Pacific, vast numbers of ships and materials began pouring into the once completely isolated islands around and near New Guinea. First, the Japanese came, and later the Americans and British came with radios, manufactured clothing, fine furniture, warfare armaments, inflatable boats, medicines, canned food, and much more. The natives of these islands, most of whom were still living in Stone Age obscurity, were overwhelmed by the material, wealth, and the magic tools these foreign visitors brought with them to their land. On some South Pacific islands in the 1940s, the native tribes came to believe that the Western manufactured materials, the cargo, had been created by divine spirits in the sky and were intended for their people. They objected to the unfairness of sending such bounty to white people alone and formed what were called cargo cults to enlist the gods to their cause. Meanwhile, on other islands, the native people worshiped the American individuals who flew in the cargo. It is hard to overestimate the power these ships, men, and goods had over the imagination of previously uncontacted people. Just think of how a smartphone would appear to people in Europe only 100 years ago. As futurist author Arthur C. Clarke noted, quote, "Any significantly advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic." When the war ended, the rest of the world rejoiced, and the ships with their crews and materials stopped arriving. The Pacific Islanders were quickly plunged back into isolation. The tribes had assumed that the arrival of these blessings had been a gift from their gods. So what could it mean when the gifts disappeared? Gone was the steady supply of medicines, trinkets, shiny things, food, and clothing. Perhaps they had displeased their gods. Maybe they could find a way to call them back if they acted faithfully. They were certain that all they had to do was what the outsiders had done, and the gods would come back. They emulated the language, customs, and behaviors of the Japanese, Dutch, Americans, and British, who were now long gone. They constructed crude approximations of landing strips, desks, phones, radios, and airplanes in an attempt to summon the gods. They sat at their tables and moved bits of bark or scrap paper around, picking up the phone and barking out orders before going down to the beach and waiting for the shipments to arrive. They thought that their activities would call their gods back to action and they would again drop cargo from the skies. As the years passed without any response from the gods, they began to search for better solutions, move emulated items around, or build better models, and separating from each other when disagreements arose. The result was dozens of different unique interpretations in different locations. For example, there are 3 major denominations of the cargo cults on the small island of Tanna alone in the nation of Vanuatu. Along with worshiping the cargo itself, certain Pacific Island cultures started a religion called John Frum. In the 1940s, the name John was among the most common first names of males in the United States. When the American soldiers introduced themselves as John from whichever state they were from, the natives only retained the first 2 words. So John Frum was just an average American man who became a sort of Jesus-like figure speaking to these primitive people. A decade or so later, the phenomenon was studied and written upon by celebrated anthropologist Margaret Mead. Lifting the phenomenon to modern times, what would a cargo cult look like to the most advanced people of the world today? Let's consider that advanced life in any world would exist in an infinitely complex matrix that, while similar or parallel to other systems, would nevertheless be unique to the extent that jumping from one world to another would be confusing at best for either the visitor or the visited. Apparitions, activities to appease the gods, symbolic representations, and seemingly confusing ritual activities seem out of place in this modern age. Yet for some current civilized nations, wouldn't a UFO sighting today, together with varied, confused, and incredulous reactions, have some parallels to the mysterious cargo floating down on parachutes to the primitive people of the South Pacific 70 years ago? At the other end of the spectrum, for those with open minds, perhaps the gods of old were really ancient visitors from other worlds with magical technologies that we simply couldn't understand. Perhaps organized religion, in general, are interpretations of incomprehensible and misunderstood activities observed long ago. In other words, perhaps we are in no position even today to look down on cargo cult mentality. Indeed, our society's myths and superstitions may be the result of such otherworldly interactions. Shamanism. Shamanism is said to be humankind's oldest religion. Shamanism in practice is used to heal and enlighten, employing ceremonial activities which can include rhythmic music, trance dancing, and mind-altering drugs that can lead to mythic journeys into the subconscious. Shamans have what can only be called spiritual experiences. They have these experiences in alternate states of consciousness. For them, the experiences they have, the beings they encounter, the deceased ancestors they meet, are merely personal experiences that do not require any faith at all. It is as unique and as natural an experience as seeing one's own fingerprint. One theme that emerges from the study of comparative shamanism is the universal nature of the experience. A shaman in the Amazon rainforest and his counterpart in Siberia seem to experience the same phenomenon, an ecstasy of enlightenment that is obtained when the soul leaves the body in search of a vision. The vision becomes the bedrock upon which his or her life will progress and is guided by an animal spirit observed in the vision. The eye of an eagle, the wing of a hawk, the swiftness of a gazelle, the strength of a bear. These are the riches sought. When Native American adolescents were sent away on a vision quest, members of the tribe requested that the child become a shaman in their newly acquired role as an adult. The animal spirit seen in the adolescent's vision quest would become the protective guide for the individual and would also often become the adult's name for the rest of their lives. Animism is the concept that the entire universe is alive. It is a belief central to shamanistic spirituality. Animism encompasses the belief that there is no real separation between the spiritual, physical, or material worlds. Spirits exist everywhere, not only in humans, but also in other animals, plants, rocks, and in natural phenomena such as thunder, lightning, and geographic features, including mountains, rivers, or other entities within the natural environment. Animism ascribes a spirit to mountains, rivers, crystals, trees, stones, the heavenly bodies, the earth, and even features in the sky. It can be seen in a tree, a post, a pillar, and the hollow of a rock. These are the seat of invisible souls. These spirits are perceived and interpreted by shamans. Another theme prevalent in shamanism is the sacred underworld, a realm in which an entire whole host of spirits reside. A cave under a sacred mountain is a common theme, or similarly, a water spring or cavern vent are often seen as entrances to the underworld. With the advent of religion, the mountain became represented artificially, replete with a mythical entranceway to the underworld called a sipapu by the Native American Hopi. The sacred mountain is often topped with a temple where a shaman could communicate directly with deities in our reality. But when the sacred mountain was created in the form of a pyramid or mound, the same process occurred. That is, the internal chamber became a portal to the spiritual other world. This parallel reality was described as a fairyland, Hades, the underworld, Middle Earth, Hollow Earth, or even the other side. It was in these sacred caves under the mountain where mystical initiation rites occurred. The amazing Dogon tribe. The mythology passed down from the Dogon tribesmen of Mali in Western Africa contains astronomical knowledge that the native people could neither have learned by themselves nor guessed. Obviously, the researchers say, a more advanced civilization must have told them about the peculiar nature of the Sirius star system, for example. These fascinating Dogon legends speak of celestial movements and even describe Jupiter's 4 moons and Saturn's rings. Yet these planetary features were not observed by human beings until the invention of the telescope. They speak of the star Sirius and a pair of invisible companions. One of the objects makes a 50-year circle around the sun Sirius, the legends declare, and is composed of a metal that is made of the heaviest matter in the universe. Astronomers have discovered that such an object, called Sirius B, does exist, but only the most sophisticated and sensitive instruments can detect it. Instruments that, of course, were unavailable to the primitive Dogon people. In addition to their legends of celestial objects, the Dogon exhibited other advanced cultural traits. A characteristic of the Dogon and certain African tribes in their unique method of nonviolent resolution for troubled clan members. When someone in the tribe does something hurtful or wrong, they take the person to the center of town, and the entire tribe comes and surrounds the person in a supportive, non-threatening way. For 2 days, they'll tell the person every good thing he or she has ever done. The tribe believes that every human being comes into this world as good, each of us desiring safety, love, peace, and happiness. But sometimes in the pursuit of these things, people make mistakes. The community sees misdeeds as a cry for help. They band together for the sake of their fellow clan member in a show of solidarity to reconnect the person with their true nature, to remind them who they really are. Within this powerful, compassionate energy, it is believed the person will fully remember the truth from which they are temporarily disconnected. The ancient Tibetans had a similar approach to those displaying antisocial behavior by killing them with kindness. Live to let live. Being in touch with our so-called primitive instincts may be the key to unlocking greater happiness and even toward obtaining higher personal potential. Have you ever had the premonition that someone you know is about to call you and then actually does? Parapsychologist Dr. Rupert Sheldrake claims telephone telepathy really does exist, and the common phenomenon is not just a coincidence. Australian Aboriginals and other primitive people have exhibited a marked proclivity for communication by mental telepathy. In the naturalistic world in which nearly every person now finds themselves, a new term may be survival of the luckiest. Those born into countries with the potential for upward mobility are the lucky ones and are becoming increasingly rare. The vast majority of people around the world have very little opportunity to advance beyond their parents' social status. Another way to gauge survival of the luckiest is whether a person has been contacted or not. Yet, ultimately, are the lucky earthlings? Who are they? For these last few uncontacted tribes remaining on Earth, freedom from want is a central philosophical theme. For example, the Andaman Island tribal people have no word for the 3 W's: when, worry, and want. Another amazing aspect of the Andaman Islanders is their ability to interpret animal behavior. They reported that the animals told the tribal people of the Andaman Islands to flee the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, and as a result, not one of their tribe died from the catastrophic waves. At the same time, many educated folk are still quick to call these people uncivilized or even savages, even though they have no debt, no corruption, no jails, no organized warfare, no chemical pollution, and no need to be governed like ignorant children. They also have far fewer fights, thefts, jealousy, and murder per capita than their civilized counterparts in India and Bangladesh, only a few hundred miles offshore. In the remote French Polynesian colony island group in the South Pacific called the Marquesas, a small group of people live a mostly Stone Age lifestyle. They go fishing, they build huts in cooperation with others in the tribe, they barter, they share, and by all accounts, they live a happy life. Yet they have no word for work. Despite this Stone Age lifestyle, the people of the Marquesas are not willing to lose their primitive ways. They would rather die early from preventable diseases, for example, than lose the way of their ancestors. cannibalism remains. Not everything about a primitive lifestyle can be glamorized. Some primitive practices are rather grisly and comparable to modern technological horrors. Outside of horror films, cannibalism is virtually unheard of in our modern age. Yet the Korowai people of Papua New Guinea are one of the last known surviving tribes to eat other humans as a cultural practice. Numbering about 3,000, they live in an area so remote that they were unaware of the existence of anyone outside of themselves until 1970. It is said that the Korowai continue the practice of cannibalism and reportedly eat the brain immediately while it's still warm. The idyllic island Nuku Hiva in French Polynesian Marquesa Islands, featured in the stories of Herman Melville, author of Moby Dick, has a population of just over 2,000 and also has a history of cannibalism. However, the practice was believed to have ceased after the introduction of Christianity. Those same islanders who have no word for work apparently still have a word for cannibalism. A 40-year-old around-the-world yachtsman named Stefan Rahmen from Hamburg, Germany, disappeared in October 2011 while on a goat hunting trip with natives, shortly after dropping anchor at the remote tropical island of Nuku Hiva. After a week of searches, charred human remains, dental fillings, and burned clothes were found near a campfire in a remote valley on the island, confirming fears that the German tourist was attacked and eaten by cannibals. New World invasion. The European explorers who discovered and claimed the New World for the Holy Father, the Pope, and the kings of Spain, Portugal, and later Holland, England, and France, seemingly never gave much thought to the impact they would have on the indigenous cultures. European powers benefited greatly from the property freely acquired from the native inhabitants. As such, the native inhabitants were never consulted or asked for their permission to become part of the domain of European nations. There was never a treaty signed with the soldiers and priests sent to acquire territory who arrived to acquire wealth and in order to advance their foreign interests. The net result of the discovery of the New World, which of course was not really new, as it has been around as long as any other continent, had a larger population than Europe, and by all historical accounts, became a total disaster for the longtime inhabitants. It eventually resulted in hundreds of indigenous cultures being eradicated, with approximately 100 million indigenous people killed by disease and war brought upon them by aliens. Likewise, about 100 million people from the Ivory Coast of Western Africa were enslaved, relocated, or murdered by Europeans in an effort to replace the labor force of the slaughtered indigenous population in the Western Hemisphere. Nearly all the priceless literature, linguistic history, heritage, cultural, and artistic artifacts of the Western Hemisphere were systematically destroyed. And lastly, most of the gold and gems mined over a period of thousands of years by indigenous people were stolen and shipped off by a handful of greedy, filthy, disease-ridden, superstitious, and tragically misguided adventurers from Europe who, with few exceptions, apparently squandered it on mindless self-indulgences. Because of the pre-existence of millions of people living in the Americas prior to the European arrival, the King of Spain may have had a certain amount of fear at the prospect of God becoming angry at him for all the murder, theft, and mayhem he endorsed in the New World. He sought redemption in 1493 when he persuaded Pope Alexander VI to sanction an official proclamation intended to dissolve the stain of bloody culpability from the king's own immortal soul. This document, called the Requirement, was intended to be read, whether translated into the native language of the inhabitants or not, to the citizens of every foreign nation just prior to their conquest. The gist of this proclamation was to inform the soon-to-be vanquished people that their lands were being donated to Spain. A few centuries later, the U.S. government made similar justifications to steal Native American lands with the proclamation of Manifest Destiny. Native American Code of Ethics. Despite the horrific treatment dealt to virtually every Native American culture in North and South America, the indigenous people remained ethical to themselves and introspective in their own ways. Cristal Quintisic, a Salish Native American who lived from 1888 to 1936, said, "Everything on earth has a purpose. Every disease, a herb to cure it, and every person a mission. This is the Indian theory of existence." Even during their monumental crossroads in history, Native Americans looked for meaning as to why they should be dealt such unfortunate circumstances. Although fierce enemies to the expanding colonists in North America as they defended their own territories, the Indians were known as noble savages because of their high moral code. In this Native American code of ethics, which still remains relevant today, it is clear that Native Americans were able to forgive their enemies and live sustainably. May we also gain from their primitive wisdom. Number 1 in the Native American Code of Ethics: rise with the sun and pray. Pray alone. Pray often. The Great Spirit will listen if you only speak. 2, be tolerant of those who are lost on their path. Ignorance, conceit, anger, jealousy, and greed stem from a lost soul. Pray that they will find guidance. 3, search for yourself, by yourself. Do not allow others to make your path for you. It is your road and yours alone. Others may walk it with you, but no one can walk it for you. 4, treat the guests in your home with much consideration. Serve them the best food, give them the best bed, and treat them with respect and honor. 5, do not take what is not yours, whether from a person, a community, the wilderness, or from a culture. It was not earned nor given. It's not yours. 6, respect all things that are placed upon this earth, whether it is people or plants. 7, honor other people's thoughts, wishes, and words. Never interrupt or mock or rudely mimic them. Allow each person the right to personal expression. 8, never speak of others in a bad way. The negative energy that you put out into the universe will multiply when it returns to you. 9, all persons make mistakes, and all mistakes can be forgiven. 10, bad thoughts cause illness of the mind, body, and spirit. Practice optimism. 11, nature is not for us. It is a part of us. They are part of your worldly family. 12, children are the seeds of our future. Plant love in their hearts and water them with wisdom and life's lessons. When they are growing, give them space to grow. 13, avoid hurting the hearts of others. The poison of your pain will return to you. 14, be truthful at all times. Honesty is the test of one's will within the universe. 15. Keep yourself balanced. Your mental self, spiritual self, emotional self, and physical self all need to be strong, pure, and healthy. Work out the body to strengthen the mind. Grow rich in spirit to cure emotional ills. 16. Make conscious decisions as to who you will be and how you will react. Be responsible for your own actions. 17. Respect the privacy and personal space of others. Do not touch the personal property of others, especially sacred and religious objects. This is forbidden. 18. Be true to yourself first. You cannot nurture and help others if you cannot nurture and help yourself first. 19. Respect others' religious beliefs. Do not force your belief on others. And finally, 20. Share your good fortune with others. Participate in charity. An end to money. Hunter-gatherer societies typically enjoyed a gift economy in which trade and barter developed only with people external to the tribe or band. Everyone within the band was treated as a family member. Whatever was available was shared without exception of reciprocal exchange. The story of the rise of social complexity is also the story of the gradual dwindling of the gift economy and the expansion of the scope of trade. A story that culminates in our situation today, in which the market mediates nearly all categories of transactions between and among humans, sometimes even within families. Even many relatively complex societies of the past, such as the ancient Egyptian and Incan civilizations, managed to do without money. However, this new tool, wherever it appeared, served to facilitate and accelerate trade. Since money serves several possible functions, a store of value, a measure of value, a medium of exchange, and a standard deferred payment, in some cases, individual societies have used two or more forms of money simultaneously. Monetary history took a decisive turn with the emergence of banking in Europe during the Middle Ages. Since traveling traders were frequently robbed of their coins or metal ingots, they took to depositing their metallic currency in the strong boxes of silversmiths and goldsmiths, and carried redeemable receipts instead. Gradually, these receipts came to be regarded as being equivalent to the metal itself. This was the advent of the first paper money. Meanwhile, goldsmiths and silversmiths discovered that it was possible to issue receipts for metal coins which they did not actually possess, a practice that would eventually give rise to fiat currencies and fractional reserve banking. Fiat currencies did not appear in the West in any significant quantity until the 19th century, when governments and national banks began issuing notes that were not backed by any precious metal coinage. It is amazing how far civilization has descended since the age of the gift economy. It all begins with gold. For decades, the faint remnants of an ancient city have been seen by people as they have flown over southern Africa. The expansive location, about 240 kilometers inland, west of the port city Maputo, Mozambique, in a remote area of South Africa, is near ancient gold mines. The remains of this huge metropolis measures, by conservative estimates, about 2,400 square kilometers. Researchers consider it to be part of an even larger community that is about 16,000 square kilometers, and it appeared to have been constructed from 160,000 to 200,000 BCE. Once the ruins were examined, the researchers were anxious to place the lost civilization in a historic perspective. Because there were no organic materials sufficient for carbon-14 dating, various rocks were tested because they were covered with a patina that looked very old. The ancient dates were also calculated by a stone circle called Adam's calendar, whose primary alignment is based on the rise of Orion 160,000 years ago, as it would have been seen when on the horizon. Local farmers were long aware of the mysterious circles, and it was simply assumed that they were created by some indigenous people in the past. The circular ruins spread over an enormous region can only be truly appreciated from the air or through modern satellite imaging. Many of them have almost completely eroded or have been covered by the movement of soil from farming and weather-related erosion. According to researcher Michael Tellinger, the photographs, artifacts, and evidence we have accumulated point unquestionably to a lost and never before seen civilization that predates all others, not just by a few hundred years or a few thousand years, but by many thousands of years. These discoveries are so staggering that they will not easily be digested by the mainstream historical and archaeological fraternity, as we have already experienced. It will require a complete paradigm shift in how we view our human history. Looking at the entire metropolis from above, it becomes obvious that this was a well-planned community developed by a highly evolved civilization. The area is significant because thousands of ancient gold mines that have been discovered there throughout the past 500 years and pointing to a vanished civilization that lived and mined for gold in this part of the world for thousands of years. Even today, the largest gold-producing area of the world is Witwatersrand, in the same region where the ancient metropolis is found. The number of prehistoric gold mines in the vicinity suggests that gold mining is the reason these communities were established and occupied for thousands of years. Also found are stoneworks of terraced agriculture that closely resemble many left behind by the Inca settlements of Peru. There are also roads, some extending almost 200 kilometers, that connect the various communities, and they are considered the oldest structures ever built by humans. As we saw in the Blood of the Gods chapter, those who study the ancient astronaut construct claim the Anunnaki were in Africa to excavate gold and crafted genetically modified humans to do the hard labor. Modern self-regulating tribes. Fast forward to our modern age and we find some civilized people who are seeking to get back to our roots and live like our ancestors. The recently popularized caveman diet and the caveman workout are examples of those looking to duplicate a long-lost lifestyle, sometimes with promising results. There is also a trend to join with other people of a like mind who want to recreate a more egalitarian society. These groups are called self-regulating tribes, and they are individuals within a group dynamic who live by their own rules. At first thought, it seems that a self-regulating cultural lifestyle in the United States would be impossible, but this is not the case. In Kalalau Valley on the island of Kauai, Hawaii, and along the northern end of Baker Beach in San Francisco, California, two different self-regulating tribes continue to meet regularly, play sports together, engage in lively discussions, and share resources. They're both nudist societies that practice barter or use the gift economy, and to a degree, both operate out of sight of local law enforcement. This is not to say that they are outside of police jurisdiction, but that they live out of sight and attempt to create a world of their own choosing. Federal and state laws apply, however, as both are within parklands and nature reserves. But in the absence of authority, these groups have organized organically as self-policing and internally regulated micro-societies, if only for an afternoon. Sometimes strong and charismatic leaders oversee the society, but these individuals can be resented by those shunned from the group. Like any community dynamic, there always seems to be a village fool. But rather than being shunned, this individual can teach the group more about compassion. Another common dynamic is resource sharing. One person cannot consume a hunted pig by him or herself, or would want to eat a whole pineapple alone, so sharing equally has become the practice. Wreck Beach in British Columbia, Canada, is another example of a self-regulating tribe. Located on the University of British Columbia property, but in the city of Vancouver, Wreck Beach is a very popular nude beach. It's a 3-kilometer long area on the tip of a peninsula where debris from several shipwrecks can still be found. Because drug use and outdoor food preparation are illegal, the surrounding local population watches for police patrols to alert the community. This can be a challenge because on hot days there can be 2,000 or more beach dwellers. Police come in on hovercraft and bust drug dealers, but there's usually far too many nudists to make any arrests, and the beach has now been designated clothing optional. There's a half-hour walk on a trail to get down to the beach, and word usually gets ahead that the cops are walking in, providing another aspects of the group's self-regulating status. Vendors of various types live on the beach and prosper during the summer season with no permits. There are larger spontaneous gatherings based on group harmony and without a central leader. Some examples in the United States are the rainbow gatherings during the 4th of July weekend and the critical mass renegade bicycle rides in most metropolitan cities. No one is in charge for the most part. They operate illegally and both are self-policing. Gatherings like these bring people together to enjoy community music, exercise, and discussion among peers. An example is a recent conversation at Baker Beach that focused on the merits of becoming a vegetarian. Most of the people involved in the discussion, including this author, were not vegetarians, yet the philosophical question was raised that if it were possible to replicate any kind of meat perfectly, would you switch over? That is, what would be your decision if there were no perceivable difference in the texture, taste, nutritional value, and cost of a substitute faux meat? Would you then do it for the ethical, environmental, and health benefits? Most participating in the discussion agreed they would. One friend, a professional ornithologist and advocate for native species, was an unlikely dissenter. He enjoyed fishing for salmon, but did acknowledge that their stock was greatly depleted. When asked if he would do it in recognition to the animals being abused by humans, he reconsidered and said yes. Other factors entering into the discussion were how one would rank an animal's ability to communicate with its own as a measure of intelligence. Recent research with animal species, including those we eat, indicate remarkable abilities to communicate using various senses. Therefore, it makes sense to rethink our relationship with animals. One might also consider that cattle ranching takes 1/3 of all non-tundra land use and produces 1/5 of all methane, greenhouse gas. Clearly, industrialized animal husbandry is not in our best term long interest. Cultured meat solves these problems. In the spirit of primitive wisdom, as humans have been doing for eons of time, gatherings and meaningful conversations such as these help people better understand themselves and each other. Lastly, let's not forget that one of the most important assets in any emergency situation is community. If you have friends or neighbors that you can depend upon, they are an invaluable asset in times of crisis. Time spent building bonds of community now can greatly pay off during any resource scarcity dilemma. A tight knit community is considered essential for survival in any scenario involving the collapse of society or a prolonged disaster scenario. Emulating the wisdom of primitive people may be an expression of our modern selves coming full circle.